There is a particular kind of silence in an old English house at 4 in the morning. The family is asleep. The fires have gone out. The rooms are cold in that specific way that only stone and plaster can be cold, the kind that settles into your hands and stays there. And somewhere at the top of the house, in a room under the roof where the ceiling slopes so low you cannot stand upright, a girl is already awake. She is perhaps 14. She has been in this house for 6 weeks. In a moment she will go down for flights of stairs in the dark, because lighting a candle costs money and the candles are counted. She will rake out the ashes from last night's fires with her bare hands, because gloves are for ladies. She will carry coal up those same for flights, one scuttle at a time, until every grate in the house is warm before anyone else opens their eyes. She will do this 6 days a week. She will do it for the next 50 years. And here is the question almost nobody asked at the time, the question that hangs over her entire life like weather: what happens to her when she can no longer lift the coal? Because there is no pension waiting. There is no savings account. There is no room set aside for her in her old age. The whole arrangement, the entire elegant machinery of the Victorian household, depends on her body working. And bodies do not work forever. So what happened to her? Where did she go? That is what we are going to find out. To understand what happened at the end, you have to understand how it began, and it began earlier than most people expect. Domestic service was, by an enormous margin, the largest single employer of women in Victorian Britain. Not factory work. Not the mills that dominate our mental picture of the era. Service. By the later decades of the 19th century, well over 1 million women and girls in England and Wales gave their occupation to the census as some form of domestic servant. If you had picked a working woman at random on a London street in 1880, the odds were very good that she scrubbed somebody's floors. Most of them started as children. A girl might leave home at 12 or 13. Sometimes younger. Often she came from the countryside, from a cottage where there were too many mouths and not enough bread, and where sending a daughter into service was not cruelty but arithmetic. One fewer person to feed. One small wage coming back. Perhaps, if she was lucky and clever, a step up in the world. The parting was usually undramatic, which somehow makes it worse. A bundle of clothes. A walk to the carrier's cart or the railway station. A mother's instructions about behaving herself. And then the girl was gone, into a house full of strangers whose habits she did not know, whose rules she had not been told, and whose approval now determined everything about her future. The first shock was usually the house itself. Girls who had grown up in 2 rooms found themselves in buildings with 20. They had to learn what a fish knife was for. They had to learn which staircase they were permitted to use and which they were not. They had to learn that they were now expected to be, in a strange and specific way, invisible. To move through a room without being noticed. To become part of the furniture that kept the furniture clean. And they had to learn the hierarchy, because service was not one job. It was a whole civil service of jobs, ranked with a precision that would have impressed a Prussian general. In a large establishment, at the top sat the housekeeper and the butler, who ran the place. Below them the cook, the lady's maid, the valet. Then parlourmaids, who were seen by the family and therefore had to be presentable. Then housemaids, who did the heavy cleaning. Then, at the very bottom, the scullery maid and the between maid, the girl called a tweenie, who worked for 2 masters and belonged fully to neither. But here is what most people miss when they picture Victorian service. They picture the grand house. The great estate. 20 servants and a butler. That was the exception. The overwhelming majority of Victorian servants worked alone. Her title was maid of all work, and the title was not an exaggeration. It was a job description. She worked in the household of a clerk, a shopkeeper, a schoolmaster, a modest professional family. The kind of household that could afford exactly 1 servant and desperately needed everyone to know it, because keeping a servant was the line that separated the respectable middle class from the people below them. She was, in a sense, a piece of social proof that happened to be a human being. And she did all of it. Alone. Consider what all of it actually meant in a house with no electricity, no hot running water, no vacuum cleaner, no washing machine, and no refrigeration. Every fire in the house had to be cleared of ash, black-leaded, laid, and lit. Blackleading meant applying a paste of graphite to the iron grate and polishing it until it shone. It coated your hands. It got under your nails and stayed. Every drop of hot water had to be heated and carried. A bath for one member of the family could mean many trips up the stairs with cans weighing more than a modern airline suitcase, and then the same trips back down again to empty it. Floors were scrubbed on hands and knees with a brush and a bucket. Not mopped. Scrubbed. Stone flags in the kitchen and scullery, wood elsewhere, doorsteps whitened at the front where the neighbors could see, because a dirty doorstep was a public confession that the household had let itself go. Washing day was its own particular ordeal, usually Monday, usually consuming the entire day and often the next. Water heated in a copper. Linen boiled, pounded, rinsed, wrung by hand or through a mangle, hung, and then ironed with flat irons heated on the range, which had to be tested against your cheek or a scrap of paper because there was no dial to tell you the temperature. And around all of this, cooking, answering the door, serving at table, minding children, running errands, cleaning windows, beating carpets, polishing silver, trimming lamps, emptying chamber pots. The day began at 5 or 6 and ended when the family went to bed, which might be 11. 16 hours was not unusual. 16 hours was Tuesday. She was paid, at the lower end, something in the region of £10 to £15 a year, plus her food and a bed. Mrs. Beeton's famous book of household management, published in 1861 and found in a great many Victorian homes, laid out suggested wage scales by rank, and the maid-of-all-work sat near the bottom of every one of them. The money came quarterly. Much of it went straight home to her family, or into boots, or into the black dress and white apron she was often required to provide herself. And yet, here is where the picture has to become more complicated than the misery it first suggests, because these women were not merely suffering. They were also living. We know a surprising amount about one of them. Her name was Hannah Culwick, and she was a maid-of-all-work who kept diaries across many years of the 19th century, describing her work in extraordinary and unglamorous detail. Her writing is a strange and valuable document precisely because it is not a reformer's account of servants. It is a servant's account of herself. And what comes through it, alongside the exhaustion and the grime, is something that most Victorian commentary on servants entirely lacked: the woman with opinions, a sense of humour, physical pride in her own strength, and a very clear-eyed view of the people she worked for. That pride is worth sitting with. Some of these women were genuinely, justifiably good at what they did. A skilled cook could produce a dinner for 12 from a coal range with no thermometer. A skilled housemaid could bring a neglected house back to order in a week. That competence was real, and it was theirs, and nobody could take it from them. There were friendships too. In larger houses, servants' halls generated fierce loyalties and equally fierce feuds. Girls shared beds, shared secrets, covered for each other's mistakes, and taught each other the tricks that made the work survivable. In smaller houses, where a woman worked alone, those bonds were formed at the back door instead, with the girl next door, the baker's boy, the woman who came to help on washing day. And there were Sunday afternoons. A half day off, if you were fortunate, perhaps one a week and one evening. Time to walk out, to visit family if they were near enough, to sit in a park, to be, for a few hours, simply a young woman in a city rather than a function within a household. But those hours were few, and the years were many, and the body kept a record. The Victorians had a medical term for it. That alone tells you something. Housemaid's knee is not slang. It is a genuine condition, an inflammation of the small fluid-filled sac that cushions the kneecap, caused by prolonged kneeling on hard surfaces. It was named after housemaids because housemaids were the people who got it. The knee swells. It becomes painful to kneel, which is a serious problem when kneeling is how you earn your living. That was one injury among many. Carrying coal and water upstairs, day after day for decades, does specific things to a spine and to a pair of shoulders. Hands spent in hot water, cold water, soda, and black lead became cracked and raw. Chilblains were routine in winter when the work started in unheated rooms before dawn. I strained from close work by candlelight and later gaslight. Feet gave out. None of this was treated as an occupational hazard because the concept barely existed. There was no compensation. There was no sick pay. If you were ill, you were an inconvenience, and inconveniences could be replaced. And that is the fact that sits underneath the entire structure. She could be replaced. There was always another girl arriving from the countryside, younger and cheaper and stronger. So a housemaid learned, very early, to work through pain. To not mention the back. To not limp where the mistress could see. Because the alternative was worse. Which brings us to the thing she feared most, and it was not the work. If you want to understand the real power imbalance of Victorian service, forget the wages. Look at the reference. It was called a character. A written statement from your employer about your honesty, your sobriety, your temper, your competence. And you could not get another position without one. Think about what that means. Your entire future employability, your ability to eat, sat in the hands of one person who could withhold it for any reason or no reason at all. A disagreement. A broken dish. A suspicion never proven. A mistress who simply took against you. A servant dismissed without a character was in genuine danger. She had no trade union, no tribunal, no appeal. She had a bundle of clothes and a few shillings and a city full of doors that would not open. This is the quiet terror that runs underneath all those 16-hour days. Not just exhaustion. Precariousness. The knowledge that everything you have depends on continuing to please, and on continuing to be physically capable, and that these two things are on a collision course with time itself. Because as she aged, both began to fail her at once. Here is the first hard truth about aging in service: most women did not do it. Most left. The great majority of servants married. Domestic service, for enormous numbers of Victorian women, was a phase of life rather than a life sentence, occupying the years between childhood and marriage. Employers generally expected it. Many would not keep a married servant at all, since a wife's first duty was assumed to be her husband's household, not yours. So a woman might spend 8 or 10 years in service, save what she could, marry a laborer or a carpenter or a groom, and leave. Her working life did not end. It changed shape. She now ran her own household on very little, perhaps took in washing or lodgers, perhaps went out charing by the day. But some women did not marry. Some were widowed young. Some had no family to return to. And for them, service was not a phase. It was the whole road. And the road narrowed. A woman in her 50s could no longer do what she had done at 20. The stairs took longer. The heavy work became impossible. Her eyesight blurred over the fine sewing. And employers noticed, because employers were paying for capability. Some households were decent about it. This is important, and it is often left out. In long-established families, an elderly servant who had been there 30 or 40 years might be quietly moved to lighter duties. A housekeeper's role. Sewing. Supervising the younger girls. Some were given a small cottage on the estate, or a modest annuity, or simply allowed to stay on and be looked after. There are real examples of employers who felt, and acted on, genuine obligation. But this was charity, not entitlement. It depended entirely on the goodwill of a particular family, on that family's continued prosperity, and on the servant having stayed in one place long enough to become part of the furniture in the affectionate sense rather than the disposable one. Change any of those variables and the arrangement collapsed. The family's fortunes decline. The old master dies and his son has different ideas. The house is sold. The servant, who is now 60 and has given 4 decades to this household, is thanked and let go. And then what? She had no pension. This needs stating plainly, because it is difficult for a modern listener to hold in mind. For most of the Victorian era, there was no state old age pension in Britain at all. None. The idea was debated for decades before anything happened, and when the Old Age Pensions Act finally arrived in 1908, it was late in the story, a small weekly sum, means-tested, and paid only from the age of 70. 70 for a woman whose knees had failed at 55. So before that, and for many even after it, there were essentially 4 roads. The first was family. A sister, a niece, a nephew, a grown child if she had one. This was by far the most common outcome, and it was the invisible pension of the 19th century, working-class families absorbing their elderly relatives into already crowded homes. An old aunt in the corner who minded the babies while the mother worked. It was not comfortable. It was often the difference between survival and destitution. But it required having family, and having family who were themselves not drowning. A woman who had left home at 13 and worked in another county for 50 years might have very little left to go back to. The second was continuing to work differently. This is where the charwoman comes in. Charring was casual day labor. Cleaning by the hour or by the day, for whoever needed it, going home to your own room at night. It was insecure and badly paid and physically demanding, but it had one enormous advantage: you set your own limits. You could work 3 days instead of 6. You could refuse the heavy jobs. Census records across the Victorian period are full of older women listed as charwomen, laundresses, mangle keepers, needlewomen, lodging house keepers. That last one deserves a moment. A woman who had managed to save a little, or who had a room to spare, could take in lodgers. It was one of very few routes by which a former servant became, in a small way, her own mistress. She had spent her life keeping other people's houses. Now the house was hers, however modest, and other people paid her. The third was charity. Victorian Britain generated an extraordinary number of charitable societies, and some existed specifically for aged and infirm domestic servants, offering small pensions or almshouse places. There were benevolent institutions supported by subscription, where donors could vote on which applicants received help. Churches and chapels ran their own relief. Some servants had joined friendly societies, paying small regular sums during their working years in exchange for support during sickness or old age. Charity helped real people. It also had limits that we should be honest about. There were far more applicants than places. Assistants often depended on being judged deserving, on producing testimonials from respectable people, on having lived a life that a committee approved of. The woman who had never had a scandal attached to her name had a far better chance than the woman who had. And then there was the fourth road. The one nobody wanted. The Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834 reshaped how Britain dealt with poverty, and the institution it made famous was the workhouse. The logic behind it was deliberate and cold. Relief should be made less attractive than the worst paid work available outside, so that only the genuinely desperate would seek it. The principle had a name: less eligibility. In practice, it meant that conditions inside were designed, on purpose, to be grim. Married couples were separated on entry. Men in one section, women in another, children in a third. People who had been together for 40 years were parted at the door. There was a uniform. There were set hours, set meals, and set tasks: picking oakum, which meant unpicking old tarred rope into fibers until your fingers bled, or breaking stones, or endless laundry and cleaning. There were rules about when you could speak and when you could leave. And there was the shame, which was perhaps the heaviest thing of all. To enter the workhouse was a public statement of total failure, in a culture that treated poverty as a moral condition rather than an economic one. Now, some nuance, because the reality was more varied than the Dickensian image. The 1834 system never entirely eliminated what was called outdoor relief, meaning assistance given to people in their own homes rather than inside an institution. Many parishes continued providing small payments, bread, or fuel to the elderly poor, partly because it was cheaper than housing them. Local boards of guardians varied enormously in their harshness. Conditions in one workhouse could differ substantially from another 50 miles away. By the later Victorian period, some infirmaries attached to workhouses had become, in effect, the only free hospitals available to the poor, and the medical care in a few of them was genuinely decent. But none of that made the workhouse anything other than a last resort, and everybody knew it. Older people spoke of it with dread. Families made real sacrifices to keep a relative out of one. And this is the answer to the question we began with for a certain number of women. Some housemaids, having spent their entire lives making other people's homes warm and clean and comfortable, ended those lives in an institution, in a uniform, in a bed in a ward, having been separated from whatever family they had left. That happened. It is part of the record. But if we stop there, we have told half the story, and the wrong half. Because these women were not passive. They were not simply things that happened to be done to. Consider what a working life in service actually taught a woman. She could manage a budget. She could run a complex operation with limited resources and no supervision. She could cook, sew, nurse, negotiate with tradesmen, and hold her nerve in a crisis. She had, by the age of 30, more practical management experience than most gentlemen of her acquaintance. And many of them used it. Former servants opened lodging houses and small shops. They became laundresses running their own small enterprises with a handful of women working under them. They became midwives and nurses and monthly nurses attending births. They became the woman on the street that everyone came to when a child was sick, because she knew what to do. They also changed the terms of the work itself, slowly and by ordinary means. Servants left. Constantly. The Victorian middle class complained endlessly about the servant problem, by which they meant that servants would not stay and would not accept the old conditions. That complaint is, read the right way round, a record of resistance. Women were voting with their feet, moving to better households, moving into shop work and clerical work and factory work as those opened up, and forcing wages and conditions to improve by making themselves scarce. That is not the behavior of victims. That is a labor market being reshaped by the people at the bottom of it, one resignation at a time. And there were the friendships. Women who had shared an attic room at 16 who were still writing to each other at 60. Neighbors in a back street who pooled what they had. Sisters who took each other in. The historical record preserves the workhouse admission book far more reliably than it preserves the afternoon two old women spent together drinking tea. But the tea happened. It happened millions of times. And it is the reason a great many of them survived at all. Step back from the individual and look at the shape of the whole thing, and something uncomfortable comes into focus. The Victorian home, that emblem of order and warmth and moral rectitude, the polished hall and the well-laid fire and the immaculate table, was a machine. And the machine ran on the bodies of women who were not entitled to any share in what it produced. The comfort was real. The labor that made it was real. But the two were kept carefully separate in the Victorian imagination. The work was supposed to be invisible. Servants were meant to clean the grate before the family woke, so that the fire simply seemed to have always been lit. A whole architecture of backstairs and service corridors existed precisely so that the labor would not be seen moving through the house. And when a body wore out from doing that invisible work, the wearing out was invisible too. There was no mechanism to catch her, because to build such a mechanism you would first have to admit she had been there. That is what her life reveals. Not simply that the Victorians were cruel, which is too easy and not quite right. Many individual employers were kind. Many families genuinely cared for servants who had grown old with them. What it reveals is that kindness is not the same as security. That depending on the goodwill of the powerful is not the same as having rights. Every good outcome in this story, the cottage on the estate, the small annuity, the place in the almshouse, was a gift. And a gift can be withheld. The whole vast question of what happens to people when they can no longer work, which we now answer with pensions and social insurance and national systems, was in her time answered by luck. By whether you had a sister. By whether your employer was decent. By whether the committee liked your testimonials. She spent her life making sure that other people were warm. Nobody had made any arrangement for her. Somewhere in England there is a house that still stands. The family that owned it are long gone, and the name on the deeds has changed a dozen times, and the fireplaces have been sealed up or converted to gas. Someone has put in a modern kitchen where the scullery used to be. The backstairs have probably been removed, because nobody needs a separate staircase for invisible people anymore. But go up to the top of that house, into the room under the roof where the ceiling still slopes too low to stand, and you are standing in her bedroom. We do not know her name. That is the ordinary tragedy of it. We know the names of the family who live below her. Their portraits survive, and their letters, and their graves have proper stones. She appears in the census as a first name, an age, and one word, servant. And then, 10 years later, she appears somewhere else, or she does not appear at all. She got up at 4 for 50 years. She carried the coal. She scrubbed the steps so the neighbors would think well of a family that was not her own. She was competent and tired and, on a Sunday afternoon in a park somewhere, probably very funny. And when her knees finally gave out, the question of what became of her was answered by whoever happened to love her, or by whoever happened not to. The houses are still standing. The fire she lit went out long ago. But the warmth in those rooms was hers. Every bit of it was hers. And it seems worth saying so, even now.